On the morning of February 26, 1959, a search party climbing the slope of a mountain the local Mansi people called Kholat Syakhl, also known as the Dead Mountain, found a tent. It was half collapsed under snow, frozen stiff, abandoned, and it had been cut open, not from the outside, the way a rescuer or an animal might tear through canvas trying to get in, from the inside, the way someone claws their way out. Inside, searchers found boots, coats, food sliced onto a plate mid-preparation, like whoever was cutting it had simply stopped. 9 people had been living in that tent. 9 sets of footprints led away from it, down the mountain, into -25 to -40-degree cold, some in socks, some barefoot, several in nothing but their underwear. None of them made it back. This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident. 9 of the Soviet Union's most experienced hikers dead in the Ural Mountains, in a case that's been officially closed twice, once in 1959, once in 2020, and is still argued over by scientists, investigators, and researchers today. Some died of cold. Some died with their chests crushed and their skulls fractured with no bruising on the skin above the break, an injury one doctor compared to being hit by a car, with no car anywhere on that mountain. We're going to walk this the way the investigators did, body by body, discovery by discovery, because the official story, a compelling natural force, that's real. It's what the Soviet government actually wrote down as the cause of death. Nobody has ever fully explained what that means. On January 23, 1959, 10 hikers left the city of Sverdlovsk by train, headed north into the Ural Mountains. Their goal was Mount Otorten, a name that, in the Mansi language, is sometimes translated as "don't go there." Their route would cover roughly 300 kilometers on foot and ski, a demanding 2-week expedition that, if completed, would earn every member of the group the Soviet Union's highest hiking certification, Grade 3. These weren't amateurs. They were students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnical Institute, and this was the kind of trip only the most capable attempted. Igor Dyatlov led them. He was 23, a radio engineering student, and one of the most experienced hikers in the entire group. The kind of leader others followed without needing to ask why. Zinaida Kolmogorova, 22, walked beside him, keeping a diary that survives today, full of ordinary details. The horses that hauled their gear part way, the cold, the jokes they told each other in the snow. Rustem Slobodin, Yuri Doroshenko, Yuri Krivonishenko, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault Brignol. Engineering students, physics students, all in their early 20s, all trained, all trusted by each other with their lives. And then there was Semyon Zolotaryov, 38 years old, a World War II veteran and sports instructor, more than a decade older than everyone else on the trip. Nobody has ever fully documented why he joined this particular group of students for this particular expedition. He simply did. One more name matters here. Yuri Yudin, 21 years old, an economics and geology student, and by every account a close friend to all 9 of the people he was about to say goodbye to. On January 28th, deep in the cold, Yudin's chronic back pain flared badly enough that he couldn't continue. He said his goodbyes at a supply point past the last inhabited settlement on their route. He embraced Dubinina. He watched his friends shoulder their packs and disappear into the white. Yuri Yudin would live to be an old man. He spent the rest of his life being the person investigators called First, the man who identified his friends' recovered belongings piece by piece, decade after decade, until his own death in 2013. He was the only member of that original group of 10 who ever came home. The other 9 kept walking toward the mountain the Mansi named for the dead. By February 1st, the group had run into trouble. A storm, poor visibility, a shift in the weather that pushed them off their intended path. Instead of reaching the shelter of the tree line as planned, Dyatlov made the call to make camp on the open slope of Kholat Syakhl itself. They dug into the snow, cutting a level platform into the incline to pitch their tent. A practical decision for hikers of their skill, though one that researchers would return to 60 years later as possibly the single most consequential choice of the entire trip. Investigators later determined the group ate their final meal 6 to 8 hours before they died. Picture it, if you can bear to. 9 people in a canvas tent, barely wide enough to lie down in. Boots off, coats hung to dry, the low murmur of conversation. Kolmogorova may be writing in that diary one last time, the wind outside dragging itself across the ridge in long, flat gusts. And then, sometime in the night between February 1st and February 2nd, something happened. We don't get to know with certainty what. That's the truest sentence in this entire case. But here's what the tent itself proved, beyond argument, when the seamstress who examined the cut marks gave her findings to investigators. The fabric had been sliced open from the inside, not from outside, by an attacker forcing entry, from inside, by someone, or several someones, trying to get out fast and unwilling or unable to waste the seconds it would take to find the actual entrance flap. There were no other footprints at that tent. None. No sign of an animal. Whatever happened, the 9 of them did it to themselves, walking out on their own legs, of their own will, into weather that could kill an unprotected person in under an hour. And they left dressed for none of it. Barefoot, in socks, in a single shoe, several of them in nothing but their underwear, as if pulling on a second layer had become a luxury they simply didn't have time for. 9 sets of footprints went down the slope, roughly 500 meters, toward a tree line a kilometer or more away. Then the snow swallowed the tracks, and for weeks, no one knew what came next. The search began weeks later, after the group's return date passed and no word came. By February 26th, a search party found the tent. At the base of a large cedar tree near the edge of the forest, searchers found the bodies of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonischenko. Both were dressed in nothing but underwear. Both had burns and abrasions on their limbs. Near them was the remains of a small fire, long since gone out. Broken branches, high up on the cedar's trunk, suggested one of them had climbed, trying perhaps to see the tent, to get his bearings, to find some sign of the others in the dark. Krivonischenko carries one more documented detail worth sitting with. Before this trip, he'd worked cleanup at a secret Soviet nuclear facility, a site that years later would be tied to one of the worst radioactive leaks in Soviet history. A disaster on the scale of Chernobyl. That's a real, confirmed fact about his life. It doesn't explain what happened on the mountain, but investigators would later find trace radioactivity on some of the clothing recovered from this case, a detail that's never been officially connected to anything, including Krivonischenko's past, in any satisfying way. Between the cedar and the tent, searchers found 3 more bodies at intervals: Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin. Slobodin had a crack in his skull, though investigators concluded it wasn't what killed him. There was no soft tissue damage to suggest it was a fatal blow, just an injury he was apparently still walking on. All 3 were positioned in ways that suggested they'd turned around, that they were trying to climb back to the tent, for supplies, for shelter, for each other, and simply ran out of body heat before they ran out of will. 6 of the 9, in the end, officially died of hypothermia. The cold took them, plainly and without theatrics, exactly the way cold takes anyone left in it too long, dressed for a bedroom instead of a blizzard. But 4 of them didn't die that way. And those 4 bodies weren't found in February at all. It took until May 4th, after the spring melt had finally loosened its grip on the mountain, for searchers to find the last 4. They were lying in a ravine, further into the tree line than the cedar, buried under roughly 4 meters of snow that had compacted over the winter like concrete. Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, Semyon Zolotaryov. These 4 told a different story than the others. And it's the part of the case that no theory, not one in more than 60 years, has fully closed the door on. Thibault-Brignol had a major fracture in his skull, with bone fragments driven into the brain. Dubinina and Zolotaryov both had severe chest and rib fractures, the kind of blunt, catastrophic force that crushes a rib cage inward. Dr. Boris Vozrojdeny, the medical examiner who studied the injuries, said the force involved was comparable to a high-speed car crash. And here's the detail that's haunted every investigator who's ever touched this file. There was no bruising, no soft tissue damage on the skin above any of those broken bones. In a normal, violent impact, a car crash, a fall, a beating, the surface of the body absorbs and shows some of that force. Here, the outside of these bodies looked almost undisturbed, while the inside had been shattered. Dubinina's body carried one more detail that resists easy explanation. Her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips were missing. Some researchers attribute this to natural decomposition and scavenging animals, given how long her body lay exposed to the elements before the snow sealed over her. Others aren't convinced that explains it fully. Nobody's settled this. It stays open, an ugly and unresolved thread in an already unresolved case. There was one more discovery that told its own quiet story. Dubinina was wearing a pair of burned wool trousers, Krivonishenko's trousers, cut from his own body after he'd already died at the cedar. Zolotaryov wore some of Dubinina's clothing too. Somewhere in the chaos of that night, after the first deaths, someone still alive had made the desperate, practical choice to strip warm clothes from the dead and give them to whoever might still survive the night. That means some of them lived for a while after the others died. Long enough to make decisions, long enough to try to save each other. They just didn't live long enough to be found. The Soviet inquiry closed that summer in 1959 with a cause of death that satisfied no one. A compelling natural force. No further explanation, no criminal charges. The file was archived and largely forgotten for decades. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case and narrowed their focus from the outset to 3 natural explanations only: a standard avalanche, a slab avalanche, or hurricane-force katabatic winds. Foul play was ruled out before the investigation even began. In 2020, officials concluded that a delayed avalanche most likely forced the group to flee the tent in a panic, in the dark, with no time to dress, and that exposure did the rest. In 2021, independent Swiss researchers published a peer-reviewed mathematical model supporting a specific version of that theory. A slow-moving slab of wind-packed snow, destabilized in part by the very platform the hikers cut into the slope, sliding down onto the tent hours after they'd gone to sleep. It's the most scientifically rigorous explanation that currently exists. It's still not something every researcher accepts, and it still doesn't fully satisfy everyone who's studied Dubinina's injuries, or the missing tongue and eyes, or exactly why panic alone would explain everything investigators found on that mountain. Other theories have circulated for decades. Military testing, infrasound-induced panic, even a Mansi tribal attack, which investigators actually looked into in 1959 and ruled out for lack of any evidence at the scene. None of these carry the same evidentiary weight as the avalanche research. They're worth knowing exist. They're not proven. What we're left with is this: 9 people, among the most capable outdoorsmen the Soviet Union produced, made a series of ordinary, reasonable choices: pitch here, cut the platform, get some sleep, and something happened in the dark that made all 9 of them choose a frozen mountainside over their own tent. Yuri Yudin spent over 50 years trying to help answer that question, walking through evidence rooms, identifying his friends' belongings, giving interviews well into his 70s, carrying the particular weight of being the one who said goodbye and then got to go home. He never got his answer either. Maybe that's the part of this case that matters most. Not the theory that eventually wins, the 9 people who never got to explain in their own words what they saw that made them run. There are a lot more nights like this one buried in history. Subscribe, because we're just getting started.